March 26, 1931. The morning began like any other in the small farming community of Prairie Heights, Colorado. Children bundled in their coats, carrying lunch pails, waited for the school bus on the dusty roads that crisscrossed the plains. The sky was gray, but that was nothing unusual for late March. But within 33 hours, 5 children would be dead. What made this morning different wasn't visible yet. It was brewing 200 miles to the north, a monster storm that would soon swallow everything in its path. The Weather Bureau had issued warnings, but in 1931, in rural Colorado, those warnings traveled slowly, too slowly to make a difference. By the time the school bus, a modified 1929 Chevrolet truck with a wooden cabin built on the back, picked up its last student, the first snowflakes were already falling. At first, they seemed harmless, even beautiful, dancing in the pale light of morning. The children pressed their faces against the frosted windows, marveling as the flakes grew larger and thicker. The driver, whom we'll call Mr. Carson, was a local farmer who supplemented his income by driving the school route. He had lived on these plains for 40 years. He had seen blizzards before. But what he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this was not just a blizzard. This was what old-timers would later call White Death, a spring storm of such ferocity that it would change school transportation forever. 20 children were on that bus, ages 6 to 16. Some were siblings, some were neighbors. All were part of a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, and where a neighbor's child was treated as your own. Mary, age 7, sat with her older brother, Tom. The Johnson twins were in the back, clapping hands in a game. Little Emma, just 6 years old, held tight to her rag doll, a gift from her grandmother. Within 2 hours, 5 of them would be gone. And here is what makes this story haunting. It wasn't a crash that killed them. There was no collision, no mechanical failure, no sudden catastrophe. Death came slowly, silently, dressed in white. It came as they waited. 33 hours of waiting, while the world outside turned into an Arctic nightmare that swallowed everything, including hope. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand the world of rural Colorado in 1931. This was the heart of the Great Depression. Families were struggling, but they held on to education as a lifeline, a chance for their children to have a better future. Prairie Heights was typical of hundreds of small farming communities scattered across southeastern Colorado. No more than a few hundred souls, mostly farmers trying to coax wheat and corn from stubborn, reluctant soil. The town itself was little more than a general store, a church, a grain elevator, and 2 small schoolhouses, one for the younger children, one for the older ones. The bus service was a relatively new idea. Before 1929, children either walked to school, sometimes as far as 5 miles each way, or they didn't go at all. The arrival of the bus changed everything. It meant that even children from the most remote farms could get an education. It was progress. It was modernization. It was proof that even here, on the edge of nowhere, the 20th century had arrived. Mr. Carson, the driver, was a farmer first and a bus driver second. Like many in his position, he had modified his own truck. He built a wooden cabin on the bed. He cut windows into the sides. He bolted crude benches inside. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't fancy, but it kept out the wind. And for the children, it felt safe. He painted it bright yellow like the big city buses,
and the children loved it. For many of them, riding the bus was the highlight of the day. A chance to see friends, share gossip, and escape the loneliness of farm life. The route Mr. Carson drove was a 20-mile loop across the prairie. He started each morning at 7 sharp, picking up children at the intersections of farm roads and the main track. The farthest stop was the Harper farm. 3 children climbed aboard there every morning. Their mother always waved goodbye at the gate. On March 26th, Mrs. Harper hesitated. The sky looked strange, dark, unsettled. She had lived in Colorado long enough to know that March storms could be brutal. For a moment, she thought of keeping her children home, but the bus was already coming down the road, and her children were so excited. There was a school play rehearsal that afternoon. How could she disappoint them? She let them go. It was a decision that would haunt her forever. By 8:30 that morning, the bus had made its final pickup. The snow was falling steadily now, but snow in March wasn't unusual. The radio weather report, broadcast from Denver the night before, had mentioned the possibility of snow, but nothing severe. What the weathermen couldn't know, was that 3 weather systems were converging over southeastern Colorado: cold air from Canada, moisture from the Gulf, and a dip in the jet stream that trapped it all in place. The perfect storm, decades before anyone would use that phrase. By 9 a.m., visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet. Mr. Carson made a decision that would be debated for years. Instead of pushing on to the school just 3 miles away, he turned back. His reasoning was sound. The children would be safer at home with their families than trapped at school if the storm grew worse. It was logical. It was also fatal. The first sign of real trouble came at the Mitchell farm. The road simply vanished. Where there had been a clear track just hours earlier, there was now nothing but white. Mr. Carson got out, hoping to find the road by feeling for the ruts. He walked 5 feet before he couldn't see the bus anymore. The wind nearly knocked him over, 70 miles per hour, screaming across the open prairie. He staggered back, his face already numb from the cold. Inside, the children grew frightened. The younger ones began to cry. Mary clutched her brother. The Johnson twins stopped their games. Emma clutched her rag doll until her small hands froze around it. Mr. Carson made another decision. They would wait. The storm could not last forever. He had nearly a full tank of gas. The heater could keep them warm. They just had to wait. But prairie blizzards do not follow city rules. The temperature, which had been 35 that morning, plummeted below 0. Wind chill, a concept unknown in 1931, made it feel like -40. The snow did not just fall. It drove sideways, finding every gap in the wooden bus. The air stung their lungs. Frost crept across the inside walls. By noon, the engine sputtered. Snow clogged the air intake. The battery, weakened by the cold, could not restart it. The heater fell silent. Now they were trapped. No power, no heat, just a wooden box in a frozen hell. The children huddled together for warmth. Mr. Carson gave his coat to the youngest. He tried to lift spirits. He led them in songs. He told stories of spring coming soon, of the circus that would visit in May. But his words were drowned out by the howling wind. By 2 p.m., snowdrifts rose against one side of the bus. The weight pushed it sideways, tilting tilting at a dangerous angle. Some of the older boys begged to go for help. The Mitchell farm could not be far, a quarter-mile at most. They reasoned they could follow the fence line. Mr. Carson refused. He knew what happened to cattle that wandered from shelter in storms like this. They froze, standing upright, sometimes within sight of safety. No, he said, they would stay together. Someone would come looking. They had to. But who would come? And how would they find a bus buried in white? As night fell, the difference between day and night was hardly noticeable. The storm turned the world into one endless, howling gray. Inside, the temperature dropped to near zero. Ice formed on the inside windows. The children's breath froze on their faces. The younger ones stopped crying. Too cold, too exhausted. It was then that little Emma whispered words that haunted the survivors forever. "Mr. Carson, I'm not cold anymore. I feel warm now." Mr. Carson knew. Hypothermia had begun. What happened over the next 20 hours exists only in fragments, pieced together from the testimony of survivors, from the physical evidence found later, and from the heartbreaking notes that Mr. Carson scrawled on the back of attendance sheets. One note read, 4 p.m., children very cold, trying to keep them moving, little ones getting sleepy, must not let them sleep. The irony was devastating. All around them, families were beginning to worry. When the bus never arrived at school, the principal tried to telephone the families, but the storm had knocked down the phone lines. The principal assumed Mr. Carson had turned back. The parents assumed their children were safe at school. Hours passed before anyone realized the truth. 20 children and 1 adult were trapped in the storm. Mr. Carson knew they could not survive another night without heat. He made a desperate choice. He would build a fire inside the bus. He and the older boys ripped apart 3 of the bench seats. They shattered the frozen wood with their bare hands. They tore pages from school books to use as kindling. With 1 match from his pocket, Mr. Carson lit a fire in the aisle. The smoke was terrible. The children coughed and choked. But for a few precious hours, there was warmth. For a few hours, they were not dying. Another note read, 8 p.m., fire dying, no more wood we can spare. Children huddled together, Harper boys very weak, Emma not responding. The Harper brothers were strong farm boys, aged 14 and 15. If they were failing, what hope was left for the little ones? Mr. Carson gave up his jacket. He wrapped Emma and 2 younger children in it. He lay over them, trying to give his own warmth. He told the older children to do the same for the younger ones. Make heat nests, he said, like hens protecting their chicks. Outside, the storm howled without mercy. The bus creaked and groaned. At midnight, there was a sharp crack. A panel split open. Snow poured inside like water through a broken dam. The older boys pressed themselves against the gap. They took turns, using their own bodies as shields. But the snow and wind were relentless. Within an hour, that corner of the bus was buried. Their space was shrinking. Another note read, 2 a.m., can't feel my hands to write. Children mostly quiet, too quiet. God help us. At around 3 a.m., the first child died. Emma, the 6-year-old with the rag doll. Her tiny body finally gave in to the cold. Mr. Carson tried to revive her. He breathed into her lungs. He pressed on her chest, but her body was like ice. He moved her to the snow-filled corner. He told the others she was sleeping, but the children knew. Children always know. By dawn, 2 more children were gone. The Harper brothers, who had given everything to protect the little ones. Their bodies were laid beside Emma in the frozen corner. Mr. Carson's writing grew weaker, shaky, barely legible. One last note read, "Morning, maybe. Children need help. If found, tell families we tried. We tried so hard." But at 10 a.m., the storm shifted. The wind eased just slightly. For the first time in 2 days, visibility stretched 100 feet. Through the frosted glass, one girl thought she saw a fence post. If there was a fence, there was a farm. Maybe salvation was near. 4 older boys volunteered to go. They wrapped themselves in rags. They stuffed pages from school books inside their shirts for insulation. They tied themselves together with Mr. Carson's belt. They promised to stay connected no matter what. At the door, Mr. Carson told them, "Stay together. If you can't find help in 30 minutes, come back." The boys nodded, and then they disappeared into the white, swallowed in seconds by the storm. The 4 boys stumbled through the snow. It felt like hours, though later they said it was only 20 minutes. The fence line led to another fence, then to a gate, then finally to a farmhouse. The Murray farm, less than half a mile from where the bus sat buried. Mrs. Murray thought she was seeing ghosts. 4 snow-covered figures collapsed on her porch. At first, she didn't recognize them as children. They were so covered in ice that their faces were unrecognizable. When she finally understood what they were saying, bus, children, dying, she acted instantly. She pulled them inside. She covered them with blankets. She sent her husband to hitch the tractor. 2 of the boys had severe frostbite. One would later lose 3 toes, but they would live. Mr. Murray climbed onto his tractor and drove into the storm. He followed the fence line. He nearly missed the bus. If he had been 10 feet to either side, he would have driven past without ever seeing it. But by miracle, he heard the cries. He found the bus. It was almost completely buried, just a mound of snow with faint sounds coming from inside. He shouted. The children shouted back. There were survivors. What followed was one of the greatest rescue efforts this small community had ever seen. Farmers abandoned their chores. They hitched their horses, their wagons, their tractors. They fought through the snow, mile by mile, toward the bus. When they opened the doors, the sight broke their hearts. Children, pale and frostbitten, huddled together in silence. Some barely conscious, others crying too weakly to be heard. One by one, they were carried out, wrapped in coats, quilts, and whatever fabric could be found. Every farmhouse in the area became an emergency hospital. Kitchen tables became operating tables. Farm wives became nurses. They rubbed frostbitten hands and feet with snow, the only method they knew. They wrapped children in warm blankets. They brewed broth and prayed. When the final count was made, 5 children were dead. Emma, age 6. The Harper brothers, David and Michael, 14 and 15. Susan, 8. And Billy, 7. Mr. Carson survived, but frostbite claimed both of his legs below the knee. He would never fully recover. He died 3 years later, still haunted by the faces of the children he could not save. The storm finally broke on March 28th. It left behind 6 feet of snow across southeastern Colorado. Drifts reached 20 feet in places. Some farms remained isolated for weeks. The investigation began quickly. How could this happen? How could 20 children disappear for 33 hours without anyone knowing? The answers revealed failures at every level. There were no protocols for severe weather, no communication system between the school and the bus, no emergency supplies, no training for drivers in survival. It was also a failure of imagination. Nobody believed a spring storm could be this deadly. Old-timers told stories of bad storms, yes, but this one was beyond memory. The tragedy forced change. Colorado became the first state to require two-way radios on all school buses. Emergency supplies became mandatory: blankets, food, water, flares. Drivers received survival training. Protocols were written for weather cancellations. The impact reached far beyond Prairie Heights. Other states copied the reforms. The lessons from this storm saved countless lives in the decades that followed. But for the families of Prairie Heights, change came too late. The Harpers sold their farm and left for California. The parents of little Emma divorced. They could not bear their grief together. The community itself aged overnight. Its innocence was gone. And strangely, outside Colorado, the tragedy faded. Within a decade, it was nearly forgotten. No books were written, no movies made, no national headlines remembered it. For 50 years, there was no memorial, only silence. Why was it forgotten? Some say rural tragedies don't matter to city people. Others say it was shame. The community felt it had failed its children. But perhaps the truth is simpler. The horror wasn't in the crash. It wasn't in violence. It was in the waiting. 33 hours of waiting. Waiting for rescue. Waiting for the storm to end. Waiting for death. And waiting does not make headlines. Waiting leaves no single dramatic moment, only silence stretched across endless hours of cold.
Today, if you drive through southeastern Colorado in late March, you may pass a small marker on a lonely road. It is easy to miss, just a simple plaque. It reads, "In memory of those lost in the storm of March 26-27, 1931. May we never forget." But for decades, we did forget. This story was buried deeper than the bus itself beneath the snow. Only now, through old newspapers and fading memories, can we piece together what happened in those 33 hours of white death. Was it preventable? Could better choices have saved lives? We may never know. What we do know is this: 5 children went to school one March morning and never came home. Their tragedy changed laws. It reshaped how America protects its children. But for their families, those changes came too late. Grief lived on long after the snow melted. Some storms never truly end. They echo across time, waiting for someone to remember. And now, you remember. What do you think? Could you have survived those 33 hours? This was more than a storm. It was a wake-up call. In 1931, no one believed a spring blizzard could take lives, but it did. And because of it, schools changed. Buses gained radios, supplies, and training. Safety became the law. Today, children ride safer because of what was learned in that tragedy. But for one small community, the lessons came too late. History reminds us, storms will come again. What matters is whether we are ready. Some storms never truly end. They echo through time, waiting for someone to remember. And now you remember.